It's interesting to look at the recent price action around BNB because a lot of people think this BNB dump currently, it's driven by all of this Binance FUD. And while there might be some truth to this, I still think it's important to look at the mass psychology, to look at the charts. I think the charts are a reflection of psychology. Because on the one hand, one might say, okay, news are driving prices because obviously the situation changes. But on the other hand, sometimes good news get completely ignored, say during a bear market, and bad news also might get completely ignored during a bull market, right? People just throw money at whatever unless everything is going up and vice versa. When everything is crashing, nobody's buying anything, even if the project is relatively solid and even if positive news come out. So what I think is important is it doesn't just make sense to look at the news, but to look at charts and try to find out with, for example, technical indicators where currently the momentum is going or where currently the relative valuation of something is going. And by looking at the relative valuation, I was actually able to offload my BNB before all of this FUD started to happen and before the price went down. And the way I do this is I look at relative valuation charts. So instead of looking at BNB in US dollars, this is BNB relative to Tether, instead of just looking at this, what I like to look at is how is BNB performing relative to Ethereum? Or how is BNB performing relative to the general altcoin market, right? Total 3 is the measure I use. And the reason why I look at this is in crypto, or in capital markets in general, but especially in crypto, prices are very much driven, in my opinion, by attention. And attention moves from coin to coin, right? Currently, all the eyes are on BNB, but maybe a few weeks back, it was rather on Dogecoin with Elon Musk and the Twitter takeover. Before that, it's on maybe the FTT token, etc. Right? So you've always got these shifts of attention, and especially when there's a lot of eyes on something, there's a lot of trading activity happening there as well. And the trading activity, especially for very small coins, tends to be rather on the bullish side because there's more people that simply just long an asset than shorting it. Now with BNB, what I like to look at is BNB relative to Ethereum. So that's this chart. Okay, so why Ethereum? Ethereum is pretty much the mother of all layer ones, right? And BNB is more or less a competitor to Ethereum. It's also EVM compatible, so you can deploy the same kind of smart contracts on Ethereum and BNB. And so BNB is pretty much a centralized, cheap alternative to Ethereum. If you just want to gamble in DeFi or in some random altcoin, then you might be choosing BNB over Ethereum because of the lower gas fees. And so there is this movement going on. Sometimes BNB might be expensive, sometimes Ethereum might be expensive. And when we look at this chart here, right, BNB relative to ETH over the long term, you can see, of course, quite a bit of adoption of BNB. But since February of 2021 or so, we were more or less in a sideways trading range here. Okay, so here BNB was very, very cheap. And then here here was BNB, it was pretty expensive. Here it was pretty cheap. And this drop here in relative valuation is actually larger than one might expect. So look at this. This is 60% roughly, okay? So if you held Ethereum over BNB in this short period of time, right, like several months only, you would have had a delta performance of 60%, or vice versa. Let's say you moved all your Ethereum into BNB in August of 2021 and you sold it all in November of this year, you would have outperformed ETH by 135%. So the magnitude of these movements is pretty big. And this is with like two pretty large assets already, right? BNB and ETH, they're all like in the top 5, I think. So once you look at even smaller altcoins, these magnitudes are even larger. And you very often see trading ranges. And that makes it nice to kind of trade the deltas and be bullish when other people are bearish on something and vice versa, basically be contrarian. And when you just look at the assets in isolation in US dollars, you can't really see this as well, right? Because when everything is going down, say Bitcoin and Ethereum is going down, it's pretty hard to spot that BNB is actually outperforming. But once you look at the relative valuations, this becomes more clear. And so before all of this FUD happened, so far BNB has underperformed Ethereum in this recent collapse by 20% roughly. Before all of this happened, I was already offloading quite a lot of my BNB. And the reason for this was simply the relative valuation. BNB had rarely been that expensive versus ETH in the past. There was only a very, very brief period in the past where this was the case. And the inflation of BNB is pretty much zero. For Ethereum, also very close to zero, right, depending on usage and the burning. And so there's no inflation that might drive long-term changes in relative valuations. It's really the adoption or where the current focus on things are. And BNB was simply just very, very expensive. And that's why I offloaded a lot. Now, I didn't publish this here on the public channel because I simply don't make as many videos here, but I do make pretty much every second day videos on the premium channel. And this is also where I talked about this. But this, I think, is the important takeaway here. Don't just follow the news, but actually look at how might the news impact something. And when something is historically expensive against another asset, right, a competing asset, then the risk versus reward in case, let's say the news are completely random, right? Let's say we can't anticipate the news whatsoever, but maybe the impact of the news can be somewhat anticipated. And when something is very, very expensive, historically speaking, then positive news can't probably push the price that much higher because the air is simply getting thin, right? People already have their target allocation to whatever asset is expensive. But negative news might have pretty much a strong impact because people might already be overweight BNB, right? When you say you invested in BNB at the beginning of this year, and you're riding this outperformance, and you're now 85% up relative to your other crypto assets in BNB, you might have way more BNB in your portfolio than you feel comfortable with. And when now negative news come out, you might be way more sensitive to actually sell and take profit. But when you're in the negative and you're already relatively low on your position, you might as well, do nothing, right? Nobody is currently selling their Bitcoin, right? It's rather people that dollar cost average right now because it's already down by 70% or so from the all-time high. So you might as well wait for the next all-time high to be generated again, right? It might take time, but a lot of people that buy Bitcoin simply just believe in it very, very long term. So there's currently more buyers than sellers, or at least the selling pressure is going down the lower the relative valuation to other things goes. And that's how I see this. That's why I think relative valuation charts are way, way more important than these US dollar charts. So I'm not really a fan of drawing lines on these US dollar charts. What I do like, though, is to gauge the general crypto momentum with moving averages. And where I use this quite a bit is on Bitcoin. So when we look at Bitcoin here relative to Tether, we can see one moving average over here, right? This turquoise line basically. And this line is actually back tested. So you can do simulations of buying and selling Bitcoin in this case and figure out what kind of moving average works the best. And when we do this with Bitcoin, the best moving average is the 44 day for the entire history and the 43 day for just like the last few years. So it doesn't change too much. The ideal duration of the moving average doesn't change too much. There's a lot of other videos on this channel, of course, that also describe the strategy in a bit more detail. But the general gist of it is currently the price is below this best back-tested moving average, which tends to indicate that Bitcoin is likely going to further underperform. So Bitcoin does move in cycles. Bitcoin does move with momentum quite a bit. And when we enter here, say the 43 day, and we look at how is the trading performing over time, right? This is a very, very long-term chart. You might notice this chart from other videos. This is the logarithmic chart of Bitcoin right here in white. And when we look at the trading performance, if you just bought and sold according to this 43 day moving average, you see these bear markets, they don't impact you as much. You do outperform by quite a bit. This is a logarithmic chart, right? So when you look at this linearly, you actually see the outperformance is pretty massive. On logarithmic scale, the main advantage I see from the strategy is simply just risk mitigation. So the drop from top to bottom isn't as large if you hedge yourself during bearish times and if you don't go too much long during bearish times. So in this backtest, I was actually shorting Bitcoin whenever the price was below the moving average. So currently, it doesn't make sense to continue to stay somewhat cautious, right? Basically, for quite a while, we are already in this situation where we should rather not be too risk on. But this situation can change. We do have our fake outs here as well, of course. No strategy is perfect, but this is how I personally approach this. I rather stay risk off right now. I also rather stay away from BNB because the relative valuation is still pretty high. Even with all of this FUD, I went so far to take off most of my assets from the Binance Smart Chain. Because you never know, right? If in the end Binance really implodes, which I don't think is likely, but even a low likelihood could materialize in the end. If this was to happen, then of course the Binance Smart Chain is done as well. So if you've got a lot of capital currently on the Binance Smart Chain that's not locked up, then simply just move it to Polygon, right? You can just bridge this to Polygon, or let's say for Bitcoin, you could directly via RenBridge, for example, move this to native BTC if you've got Wrap BTC. So I think the current time demands to be as cautious as possible because there's really not a lot of benefit in taking more risk than necessary. The upside is relatively limited. Things are still comparatively expensive, and only once things stabilize and they don't continue to drop and drop and drop, only when things stabilize and we are above the 43-day simple moving average in Bitcoin for a longer period of time, that's then I think that's the point in time where it makes sense to really put on the gas pedal again and invest harder. But right now, I think it's better to be too cautious than to be too optimistic because there's still a lot of different potential black swan events that might happen, right? Grayscale is a big question mark. Binance is a big question mark. And of course, rising interest rates, the overall macroeconomic environment is also a big question mark. That's currently how I approach it. Looking forward also to what you're currently doing. So feel free to comment this down below and see you in the next video as well. Bye-bye.